Hello, everyone, and welcome to Plasma 2022. My name is Paige Sarlin, an assistant professor in the Department of Media Study here at University of Buffalo. And I am appearing in front of a Plasma logo, and I'm a white woman wearing glasses right now. This public lecture series is sponsored by the Department of Media Study and the Office of the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at University of Buffalo. We begin every presentation with the acknowledgement that the land on which the University of Buffalo operates is the territory of the Seneca Nation, a member of the Haudenosaunee Six Nations Confederacy. This territory is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Treaty of Peace and Friendship, a pledge to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. It is also covered by the 1794 Treaty of Canandaigua between the United States government and the Six Nations Confederacy, which further affirmed Haudenosaunee land rights and sovereignty in the state of New York. Today, this region is still the home of the Haudenosaunee people, and we are grateful for the opportunity to live, work, and share ideas in this territory. We offer this acknowledgement with an aspiration inspired by the words of Adam Khalil, an artist who is a member of the Ojibwe tribe and a previous speaker in the Plasma series. According to Adam Khalil, a territorial acknowledgement can demonstrate a coming to an awareness and provoke thought and reflection, all of which are essential in beginning to establish healthy reciprocal relations. It can become part of our living out of our apologies for the historical reality of settler colonialism and its ongoing legacy and continued attack on people and land. It is an important, acknowledgements are an important and fundamental practice that we understand must occur on the levels of epistemology and culture. So tonight, we turn to, and I'm very excited to introduce Art Jones, whose performance and presentation will be recorded tonight. If you don't wish to have your face or name or voice recorded, please mute yourself. As I said before, this is sponsored by the Department of Media Study, but the series is also curated in collaboration with Squeaky Wheel Film and Media Arts Center. I will put in the chat the email for those of you to contact if you want to be added to our listserv, email listserv. We have a number of other lectures coming up. Next week is Emily Martinez, who will be talking actually about NFTs and Web 3.0, an artist and thinker and terrific human. That she'll be speaking next week, April 11th. On the 18th, we'll have Ngendo Muki, who's an animator and filmmaker, Jordan Lord on the 25th. On May 2nd, Eliane Batochi, who is an illustrator, scholar, and designer of narrative games, will be speaking. And then on the May 9th, the last Plasma will involve a screening of videos made by the students in Plasma. Tonight, so to introduce Art Jones works with moving images, photography, sound, and objects. He often uses original and found media as raw material to be sampled and recombined in order to examine implicit cultural meanings or suggest new ones. Jones's film and media art projects and performances have been presented at numerous international and national institutions, and just a few to name is Chinatown Soup in New York City, the Times Art Center in Berlin, Roulette Intermedium, and the Mana Contemporary Art. Most recently, there was a 30-year career spanning exhibition at the Herter Art Gallery at the UMASS Amherst Gallery that was actually curated by Laura McGough, who's a graduate of the Department of Media Study, a PhD graduate. And she wrote in her description of Jones's work as an introduction to that exhibition, quote, working across film, video, and live media performance and 3D printed sculptures, Jones explores how social information is both transmitted and received. Experimentation with traditional media forms through the manipulation of image, sound, and text is a key component of his explorations. Jones has developed since the early 1990s a unique visual hip hop aesthetic that translated the aural qualities of rap music into moving images and introduced video noise, rapid fire repetitive editing, and distortion to the traditional documentary format. Tonight, Jones will perform Science for Disease Culture, a live video remix performance. This title refers to a passage in Rammellzee's iconic treatise on Gothic Futurism from 1979. I think that is all I will say. But now I will say that introduce and give the Zoom microphone and screen over to Art Jones, who we're thrilled to have tonight.
Thanks for that amazing intro. And here I am on Zoom again, still on Zoom. I had a dream that I had to find my passport because I was going somewhere, but it was just a dream. And I don't know where my passport is, and I haven't seen it for 2 years. But anyway, I'm really glad to be here. So I'm going to be showing and playing some things that relate to music and text and its relationship to the visual image. And after that, or maybe between that, I hope we can have a really productive conversation. That's all I really hope for, is some good Q&A. Since if I can't be here among you, at least I can hear what you think. So related to that, I think I'm going to begin with a question. Not a question for you, but a question for me that someone posted. After watching Afrofuturist Vernacular, which is one of the films that I made that I recommended people look at before this lecture, it was a bit hard to fully understand what the film was aiming to do. I found myself wondering why you decided to use a robotic voice. Rather, would it have made a difference to use an actual person's voice? Yeah, definitely would have made a difference to use an actual person's voice. What I was aiming to do, that's a tricky one, of course, right? Like, you're going to ask an artist what they're aiming to do. They're going to lie to you. They're going to be like, I totally knew exactly what I was doing. Everything was diagrammed, of course, from the very beginning. And, I had it attached to a canonical theorist. Of course, that is not true, right? Some of that might be somewhat true. What I was aiming to do was just, I listen to a lot of hip hop, and I connect sometimes the literal nature or the abstract nature of hip hop lyrics, depending on the artist and depending on the song, to certain social realities, right? Particularly the idea of vocal legibility and being understood. Anyway, long story short, that led me to think about how about the poetic aspects of mistranslation, right? How about, I grew up in New York City, and that means I understand every fourth word of the Spanish I hear on the street, right? So all of us are somewhat fluent, right? Or non-fluent, right? In some other language. So I just decided to do that as an experiment and say, well, let's translate a set of lyrics into several languages. First, running it through some friends who speak the language, and then running that through Google Translate. So it's one more opportunity to be misunderstood. And what are the poetic possibilities of that? So that said, I'm going to play a little bit of a film from 1959, I believe, called The Cry of Jazz. I'm going to play an excerpt of this because it's directed by, I believe the director is Edward O. Bland, filmed in Chicago. And it's bit of a hybrid film. It's a fiction film, but with a lot of documentary footage. And I'm going to show this to you because I think a lot about Afrofuturism and what that means in terms of a certain progressive notion towards realities of race in the United States and what that means. Anyway, I am interested in ideas. My own idea of Afrofuturism has to do with more of a circle, right? More of a record spinning and more of an idea of the futureless future. Imagine that you will be part of the future, right? You will have greater technology, and yet your social position will change not at all, right? You will exist exactly in the place that you are in. You will simply be in the future. Like, what does that mean, right? The futureless future. Anyway, I'm going to play a little bit of this called The Cry of Jazz, where they start to talk a bit about it. And then we'll go from there.
As Lewis put it a moment ago, a Negro is potentially capable of experiencing everything that all Americans experience, plus Negroes undergo the hazard of being Negro. The hazard of being Negro begins before birth and extends beyond death. The difficulty in being Negro resides in being able to accept all the hazards of being Negro and simultaneously to triumph over these hazards. Jazz is the musical expression of the triumph of the Negro spirit. The Negro cry of joy and suffering in jazz is based on a contradiction in jazz. This contradiction is between freedom and restraint. Let's start with restraint in jazz. The feeling of restraint in jazz is caused in part by the way jazz form operates. The basic formal unit of jazz, which is called the chorus, repeats itself endlessly without getting anywhere. That is why the chorus is restraining. This endless repetition is like a chain around the spirit and is a reflection of the denial of a future to the Negro in the American way of life. Another restraining factor in jazz are the changes. Like any other structure, the chorus is held together by certain materials and their patterns. These materials and their patterns are termed harmonies. The jazzman calls them changes. The changes are stated through the rhythm section, especially the piano and guitar. The pattern of the changes is repeated over and over again.
Okay, I guess hopefully everyone can still hear me.
Yep, we can still hear you.
Great. Now I'm going to present another video. So this is, sorry, 1 second. Always technical difficulties. This is a song called Technical Difficulties by the group Dr. Octagon. I believe it's from 1997. It's part of a presentation I did about Afrofuturism. And I'll play portions of it and then I'll stop to read some very boring stuff for you because this is a lecture. Okay, so to begin with, let me share my screen and here we go. I hope everyone can see.
You unlock this door with the key of imagination. Beyond it is another dimension. A dimension of sound. A dimension of sight. A dimension of mind. You're moving into a land of both shadow and substance, of things and ideas. You've just crossed over into the Twilight Zone.
Vast intellect.
No es lo mismo torta de huevos que mis huevos en tu torta, pero a mí no me importa si eres loca o loco, tienes que visitar al Dr.
Shabak is not here, I'ma do it for you circumcised niggas don't realize my format is a palm spectrum to damage any rectum. This is the real dinosaur funk which permitted G-Funk to play anally through the trunk. A digital master was given to Sam Cooke and Jimmy Castor. Kurt Cobain was here but Doc Ock has Novocaine.
The doctor announces that the sci-fi realization is not the genial Western fantasy of Star Wars. Rather, his format or mode of address is analogous to a spectrum analyzer, a device that measures the strength and input signal, electrical, acoustic, or optical, across a broad range of frequencies. Dr. Octagon is speaking to a larger audience than that of the typical sci-fi consumer. To damage any rectum is a standard statement of the consequences of interfering with the doctor's mission. Throughout the song, Dr. Octagon embodies science and technology. An automobile has an anus. He compares himself to an enzyme. He evokes sex-computer condoms. In perhaps the greatest line of the song, he traces a temporal loop in which he travels from future to past to give a digital master to Sam Cooke and Jimmy Castor, thereby securing and creating his own Afro-future through the act of inspiring his musical ancestors. This back and forth loop can be interpreted as a form of call and response, which is a touchstone of African-American religious practice.
Theoretically keeping puppies in a pedigree, small fetus bought Santa Claus to greet us. Rappers know I'm equipped with Clorox and chemicals that'll burn off your lip. Intestines, investments hide money in your stomach. Who could stop Pepto-Bismol? Only a gremlin eating in Larry Parker's like Gizmo. As Dr. Octagon gynecologist, girls open legs for beer cakes. French toast and herbs were covered with giant eggs. Living small, people unequal, challenge my thoughts. No station or radio would understand. The perfect enzymes, me with your brain in my other hand. Suck my oil, yo Julio, tell him.
Sácate la cabeza de entre las nalgas. Si quieres chichones, quiero chuparlas. El árbol con zapatos verdes es muy amable. ¿Quién sabe?
MP4, 6 spacecraft in the mix, kissing Mary J. Blige on Earth was quite normal. As Dr. Octagon walking through a polygon, my first impression was to give patients a lesson. Who's the best to put me to the test? I'll battle ultramagnetic, my own self as well.
The MP4 files format specification was published in 2001, 6 years after the release of the record Dr. Octagon Ecologist. While it's possible that Dr. Octagon simply traveled into the future and returned to the past to drop this knowledge onto his listeners, it's just as likely that he's forecasting the next version of the popular MP3 format, which had not yet overtaken the physical CD, but was instrumental in bringing the concept of an all-digital music sharing network to the masses. Dr. Octagon, walking through a polygon refers to Octagon's existence as a being able to traverse the crossroads between the analog and the digital worlds, evoking the legend of the crossroad as the abstract space where blues legend Robert Johnson made a deal with the devil. He states his willingness to battle himself, bringing to mind W.E.D. Du Bois's concept of double consciousness laid out in his 1903 essay, The Souls of Black Folk, a condition wherein people of color living in the matrix of race technology must constantly see themselves through their own history and sense of self, and also through the eyes of the dominant society. Two mirrors in the clear suggest a future in which this duality can be reconciled.
Two mirrors in the clear, I'm floating deep in the atmosphere. Through Los Angeles heights, I'll damage Hollywood lights.
Sorry.
That's to put me to the test. I'll battle ultramagnetic, my own self as well. Two mirrors in the clear, I'm floating deep in the atmosphere. Through Los Angeles heights, I'll damage Hollywood lights. Woman know my sex, computer condoms humping on MPEGs. My number 275-4969 disconnected, my first black robot. Space connected while you listen to Keith Sweat. Your brain is caught up in the net. 2 million, 3 billion whack records in the solar. The system's out of reach, niggas try to preach while you trying to act fly walking up Venice Beach.
His promise to damage Hollywood lights is an acknowledgement of the history of the American film industry, trading in the worst of racial stereotypes. Dr. Octagon then proposes a cyber-erotic scenario, sex computer condoms humping on Ampex, worthy of Donna Haraway or Hajime Sorayama. The frustration with the system out of reach equals no access to the masses doesn't translate into political action. Rather, we fall into default modes of preaching to the choir or individualist escapism, trying to act fly, walking up Venice Beach.
Zap, like Roger, my funk is powerful than Troutman. 7 years ago, like California was taken from Mexico. Who knows this? Magnum 5 can't scope this. A&Rs will go crazy trying to find someone to duplicate Dr. Octagon. Yo, chief administrator, suck my oil.
We are experiencing technical difficulties. Please stand by.
Allora tieni miedo della siesta. Si no hay cerveza, no hay fiesta. Vamos a celebrar esta noche. ¿Quién tiene las llaves? Amigoche, vámonos.
Auto 406-7543 equals the limits of nobody in this trauma. World of unconsciousness. Black piss and power coming down through the urinalysis, leaving hands with calluses. Right power.
The trauma that race technology has delivered unto humanity can't be quantified by any system. We exist in the world of unconsciousness. The Afrofuturist must engage the concepts of Blackness and power not as counter myth or parallel system to the race technology that undergirds almost all social relations, from work to school to love to death, but rather must come down through the urinalysis, a method to detect a range of disorders within the human body politic. When the real work is done, we'll know, leaving hands with calluses. Right power. Thanks. By the way, if there are any questions or comments as we go, this is fine. It's a very open platform mode of address. So thanks for watching that. For this one, I was just adjusting some instrumental effects as it played, as a QuickTime movie played. I always feel like I want two more arms when I'm doing this kind of thing. Next, so that was the future, and I would like to show you the past. Understanding, of course, that as was it James Baldwin who said that for the Negro past and present are synonyms, right? The idea of a continuum rather than these discrete eras that we like to divide history and the experience of humanity into. Anyway, this is a piece called Sweet. What can I say? Inspiration was, I collect photographs in different genres. Some of the photographs I collect are sort of hidden histories, right? In this case, it's about an American celebration that is kind of a repressed discourse, not really spoken or talked about, but absolutely foundational to our sense of ourselves as Americans. So this one is called Sweet, and let me share it for you. Okay, hopefully you can see the black screen. Okay, so that was made from scanned photographs of lynching picnics in the United States. And I eliminated the subjects, I guess I know what else to call them, victims, subjects of those lynchings. So those are the kind of gaps in which you see the clouds. And then made a animated collage of that. The text is from Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, and the music is from the song Invisible Man by the Breeders. So they're kind of being mixed. So give me one moment to set things up again. Again, if there are any questions now, or we'll just wait after I show one or two more pieces and do the audio mix. Just give me one moment. Can everyone see some weird squiggly lines? That's good. Okay. Great. Let me begin.
One, two. Do thy work thyself, so we dally up a plantation night. Then I saw it come on.
We lost picture and sound art, just so you know. So we lost picture and sound. I don't know if you can hear me.
I don't believe he can, Paige. Could you send him a email?
Sorry, folks. My screen kept dying. I hope you caught a little bit of that.
We just caught the beginning. We didn't.
Oh, just the beginning. Oh, okay.
So we lost patron sound. Yes.
So I'm going to try to do this with 3 hands. Very primitive way. Okay. Just give me 1 second, and this will be the last piece.
No peace, oh no, no peace, oh no, no peace. Hey, listen carefully now to what I have to say. Listen carefully now. There will be no peace, no peace. And this earth, no peace. There will be no peace, no peace. Oh no, no
We can't hear you.
That's the performance. Thank you, everyone. And I'd like to give thanks to my little MIDI controller that lets me do all these things. Anyone has any questions or comments? Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Art. That was great. And yeah, a challenge, right? To be someone who works with video and performance and remixing between audio and image, right? With one screen to use, right? Like it's just an entirely different experience, right? Where we're getting such a thin thread from what is really big from your kind of repertoire. Right, with just one screen.
Yeah, it's an interesting challenge to scale things and, and try to transmit as much as possible, but, it becomes a different thing.
Yeah,
which is
great. Absolutely. Are there any things that have you been, because I know that you did a live performance this last year, or I guess last year, in terms of in a gallery space, and how have you been performing over Zoom in the last year, 2 years, and how do you perceive of that difference?
Yeah, it's having to come to terms with the realities of the screen and really make the mixes understanding that it's a small rectangle and what that means in terms of content and details, et cetera. I was able to perform at a space in New York called Culture Hub last week, and that was great because I could be in the space. I was providing visuals with an experimental drummer and a DJ, and it was great to be in the same space with them, but of course, there was no audience. It was us, and then everything was going out into social media live. So again, this kind of understanding that like, it's great to be in a physical space. It's great to kind of see what's happening with your collaborators and to be able to improvise in that way. But then understanding that the audience is seeing something absolutely different. And we were very dependent on the crew with the cameras that would move from one to the other. So it felt more like live television rather than a musical performance, which is the way I prefer, right?
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it's also interesting to see you when you work with things that are about music, performance, and dance, right? It's so different without any body references, right? Only other flat images.
Right. Yeah. And black rectangles with white text, but I love text, so, maybe not in this context, though.
Yeah. Well, great. So I want to just open it up to questions from students and about performance, about Afrofuturism. Yeah. And I'll let Famous take over. But if Alice, you want to unmute yourself and, if you have your video too, that'd be great too. I encourage people to just raise your hand or put questions in chat.
Mine's not a question, but more so just a brief comment. I thought it was funny that you had a couple technical difficulties right before you were playing the technical difficulty piece. I just thought that was a little funny thing that happened.
I totally am going to pretend that was planned. Yes, absolutely. That's how on top of my game I was. Yes, thank you for saying that. But yeah, technical difficulties are actually part of it. And especially since being relegated to online with these performances, I know for myself and a lot of other people that perform, at a certain point, you start to kind of think about how you incorporate it into the actual process of the performance, right? It becomes unpredictable in a way that, when you do a sound check live or a video check live, it becomes more predictable. The signal is going to go through, right? But here, I'm in a closet at City College of New York, and the Wi-Fi can just cut out at a moment, or something can happen,
Well, if there are normal people take a second to write their questions, I will post a question from the master doc in the chat that I thought would be an interesting place to start off the conversation. And there we go. Okay, I will read it. So this is a question from Kelsey Conlon. After viewing Afrofuturist Vernacular English 2019, I enjoyed the way it was shot, edited, and paired with the audio. It created a very hectic aesthetic. I was curious as to why the shots were then animated into shadowed and highlighted shapes. What was the aesthetic reasoning or the message behind editing the video in this fashion? Way.
Yeah, so the concept was the viewer is experiencing mostly first-person point of view shots from what could be argued as an alien perspective. Now, I'm leaving that very open, as far as what you might consider an alien perspective. But that's just to say that a lot of the shots are not sci-fi in terms of original content, right? It's kind of a journey through New York City. I'm on the subway, I'm in the park, I'm watching basketball games, etc. But there's a strangeness. There's an other way of seeing that's kind of throughout the whole thing. There's a version of the piece in which it's experienced through 3D glasses, so it has a stereo effect as well. That other than reality-ness, I think we might all be able to relate to at least at certain points in our experience, in which the normal is quite strange. I certainly experienced this living in New York or just in general, right? So that was the idea. I wanted you to see this through the perspective, not of a literal alien viewer, but perhaps an alienated viewer might be a best way to put it, if that makes sense.
I also had a question that was actually from me, the TA. Hello. When you use the word, when you use the term Afrofuturism, do you consider it from a more speculative fiction or more realistic fiction? And that, I mean, do you imagine Afrofuturism as a future in which the woes and slowdown of a Black culture that came from slavery and oppression didn't occur, so we just evolved in a different timeline, or a more realist fiction where we still have the past that we understand and we're projecting ourselves forward in the future? So yeah, more like a different timeline or like a future thought of it. Which one does your term Afrofuturism
right
work with?
I think I might have an even a sillier concept in which a sci-fi scenario in which people could be kidnapped from their home planet and genetically modified and altered in order to work as laborers for, crazy, right? In other words, my Afrofuturism is more documentary. Okay. Someone's science fiction is someone else's social reality.
Very good. Okay, I like that. That is a quote I will put in the paper.
Oh, thanks.
Awesome. Okay, so I do have another question from students that I will pop in the chat.
And encourage people to raise their hands or just unmute themselves if there people have questions.
There you are. Okay. One second. I too am using multiple machines to do this, so I apologize for the delay. Okay, so this one from Tyler Matthews. In the reading My Black Death by author Bifar, he talks about how African art influenced a lot of Western designs, especially Picasso. My question is, when exactly did Picasso discover this art, and in how many of his works did he use them as a base or with heavy influence? It seems he did some deep dives into the meaning of African art, so I assume he used their designs quite often. He was very abstract after all. And I bring up this question because I know a lot of Western culture artists like to say they're influenced by African art and Black culture, but that's also another way to say that they stole it. So I thought it was an interesting question to bring up. And whatnot.
Right. I mean, it's a very good question, right? I don't know that many scholars have written about this particular topic related to Picasso. And I guess, I don't know if it would be simple to attribute a particular time to when he was influenced, or, I mean, I could say, I don't know, maybe when was he not, you know? It's almost like asking me, when was I influenced by rock and roll? I don't know. When was I not influenced by punk or hip hop? I don't know. You know, it's hard to attribute. I think for me, it's more interesting to understand that, you know, it's not like a wild reading of Picasso if you look at the work, right? It's not really that difficult. It's more that, you know, depending how old you are, depending how cool your art history courses are, it's just been kind of another repressed discourse, right? Kind of obvious and yet not spoken about, right?
Very fair. And in terms of like the rock and roll and whatnot, you know, I'm aware that rock was an appropriation of blues music. So it's a weird notion of talking about like influence versus appropriation when considering rock and jazz, because I enjoy both, but I'm aware that influence is a tricky word to use in that subject debate.
Yeah, it is tricky, and I mean, thank God, I think it's easier today to have conversations that don't end up in the simple duality. You know, it's like, you know, hey, Miles Davis, when were you influenced by the Western canon? You know, it becomes a much more productive conversation about how influences are deployed and how they're received, right? Because we're all guilty. We're all guilty. So, yeah.
And we have a question in the chat. Okay. So we have a question in the chat from Birdie, and then we have a question afterwards from Sergio. Birdie, would you like to unmute yourself? If not, I can read it.
Yeah, I can read it. So when I was reading My Black Death, I noticed the relation between the mention of fetishization of Black entities, even if the entity isn't inherently human, i.e. the aliens from the movie Alien. Why do you think Blackness is continuously used as this image of extraterrestrial beings or something of a separate species? Do you think it is because of the generational whitewashing of media and treatment of Blackness as a source of curiosity? Is this an idea that you tried to relate to?
I mean, yeah, whether I try to relate to it or not, sometimes it's cast upon you, right? So the idea of this alienation, an amazing film is John Sayles' film, Brother from Another Planet, which treats this idea in a very humorous and poignant way, and many other things. So again, this idea of alienation, right? Not necessarily in the way in the way that we think about that word, but also in the way that alienation almost as a suit that can be put upon you, right? Or that you realize that you're wearing. Occasionally I walk past a group of police officers just minding their business, having a good day, and I'm having a good day. And all of a sudden, that suit of alienation is upon me. And I realize I start to see things possibly through their eyes, which might relate to the kind of abstract animation style that I deal in, right? I become an abstraction to myself, at that moment, if that makes sense, right? And that's part of the double consciousness. There's the me that I wake up in the morning and see, and then there's the awareness and of how I must navigate the world. So the idea of extraterrestrial beings or something of a separate species, I mean, a lot of American history is only possible if that trick can be used, right? If you can't start to see people as extraterrestrial or as something of a separate species, yes, human, but, that critical but, then you can't possibly have American history, right? That history, the whole history of progressiveness in a way, right? Or moving ever forward, right? Like that idea of the future being better and forward and better, in a way, has been built on this idea of alienation and thinking of people as separate beings. So the idea of the part of Afrofuturism that wants to ignore that history or do a parallel history of everything's just spaceships and exploring galaxies, I'm not that interested in that. More of an Afrofuturism that is a loop into the past, right? That constant cycle, if that makes any sense. Right, Lovecraft. Yeah, Lovecraft was very into Blackness as alienation. He sure was.
Awesome. Bertie, I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
And we have a hand up from Sergio. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah. I want to apologize in advance for this question because I feel like it's probably going to be a little hard to answer.
I'm going to forgive you in advance. You're forgiven for this question.
Thanks. If you could like sum up your statement as an artist as a whole into the most condensed of like sentences or paragraphs or whatever, like what do you think your like mission statement as an artist?
Oh wow, that really is tough.
Sorry.
History, power, and culture. Where do the dots connect?
Oh.
Sorry.
Now, is this a question for me?
No, that's my statement.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, that was a good answer.
All right, thanks. It was a good question.
That is very clever to answer with a question.
I'm not trying to be that asshole. Like, it's genuinely, that's my statement. Where do they connect? So the mission is to figure it out in every particular case, right? Where in this case do they connect? Where in this case do they connect? So, taking those 3 points, I suppose, gives me a lot of approaches, a lot of points of attack to a particular topic or subject.
Awesome. I think that is a beautiful answer to that question. But I hope that answers your question, Sergio.
I actually had if I could ask another question, this one would be a lot easier to answer, I imagine.
Go for it.
Are you familiar with the music genre plunderphonics?
Yes.
Are you a fan?
Yeah, I am a fan. I mean, I think it all relates to remix culture in general, right? And
yeah, for sure.
And very positive appropriation tactics.
Cool. Yeah, that's one of my favorites. And judging by the songs that you had played so far, I was like, this guy's got to be a fan.
Yeah, I mean, deciding to work in time-based media or just visual art in general, I come from a time in which the predominant art were what graffiti writers were doing, right? Which I, as a kid, understood not just, yes, a way of speaking, right? It was a language, a way of getting your voice out there, right? To go all city with your stuff on a train was absolutely radical, but it was also a response to the fact that, growing up, all you see in terms of visual print media are things like liquor ads, cigarette ads. And no one really talks much about that it was vengeance, you know, related to that. So I very early on was thinking, what is a visual or time-based analog to what these kinds of artists are doing, right? Artists that use strategies of repetition, appropriation, right? Diving deep into the memory and pulling something out and then turning it into something new, right? And I mean, this many cultural contexts, this is happening, right? It happens, you know, Guy Debord in Society of the Spectacle, right? I mean, a lot of people write about this in different ways. So, but that, I just want to make that influence clear. If I want to claim an influence, it's not necessarily a visual art influence, even though that's there, but a lot of what was happening at that particular cultural moment, and with the DIY aesthetic of punk, that was kind of predominant at the very same time.
Awesome, thanks.
It's interesting that you mention the, you know, like, so the way that Laura McGough talks about your work, as do other people, is the kind of idea around the music itself, right? As some of the tropes in hip hop music itself being part of something that you've incorporated as an editing strategy early on in ways that now are so, you know, ubiquitous, right? So it's hard, I think, sometimes for some, you know, not even just like, you know, I think that there's the you know, they're not even the MTV generation. This is the TikTok generation with tiny snippets and all of this interruption and lots of different, you know, talking back to media and all of that revenge, right? Or the revenge of images. But it's interesting that you talked specifically about tagging and that as a place where it first was your first experience of the revenge, like the revenge response, because I didn't think about it until now about your video, your animation now is less cut than it is that almost the visual movement of those edges and almost like spray paint. Like I started to realize, I was like, oh, it has some sort of different thing where the cutting that I remember from earlier works of yours is not there. Do you want to talk about that? Like that there's a kind of longer feel to these, or am I like, do you recognize that? Have you thought about that in your own, how you've shifted your own editing and relationship to playing through tracks and images?
I'd just like to quote you on that in the future, and I will give you a commission if I can, because it's absolutely true, right? I think it's absolutely true. And I think definitely the idea of a mix of the abstraction and the, you know, the representational is certainly there. But yeah, I wanted to put things on these surfaces in a different way. And absolutely, I think it would go back to tagging. I guess maybe that's why so much subway imagery keeps showing up too, right?
Right. But it is also just interesting about that flow, right? Like that it's a different kind of flow and rhythm in these pieces. I mean, I feel like I want to now get out some of the old Art Jones videos, right? Like to be like, this is different, you know, like there's a shift here in some of this, and it becomes so much more meaningful, right? Also in thinking about how you're responding to your surrounding, you know, like, so in other words, that circle for yourself, right? In terms of the past and the present and the past and the present and the future of your own work. Do you want to talk about that, about even how you think about your own history making and performing and with music and the present?
Well, I mean, I can say that the idea of the remix and taking these disparate images and sounds and, you know, one type of imagery is the thesis, the other is the antithesis, and trying to come up with some kind of synthesis is definitely part of it. But then as this cut up style just becomes more ubiquitous, I realized, oh yeah, this can, of course, like, you know, the beauty of the market or capitalism is that it can recuperate anything and it can turn anything into just a style. And I thought, well, shit, it doesn't have to have meaning anymore. well, if I'm still interested in that, so now maybe a more layering approach becomes something to try. So yeah, I'm responding to social media, I guess.
Awesome. There's a question in chat that I wanted to address because I posted it. This one is by Ian Backish. Afrofuturism is a cultural movement that uses sci-fi and fantasy to depict a world where Africans weren't at the bottom of the barrel. It expresses a vision of a technologically advanced and largely positive future in which Black people, after which Afrofuturist vernacular English, it was interesting to see the contrast of the AI voice with the content of the two Dr. Octagon songs being used. My question is, what were the origins of Afrofuturism and where is it today? How have people like Dr. Octagon used Afrofuturism in the past, and how and has it been unnoticed by the layman?
Yeah, well, I definitely cannot and would never try to establish a provenance of Afrofuturism. I mean, you could go to the museum shows and, see the same Sun Ra pieces, which are great, but I would never have a provenance of that. And then, add Parliament Funkadelic and et cetera, and, many. But the idea of sci-fi and fantasy to depict a world where Africans weren't at the bottom of the barrel. So if you want a provenance, you would have to include things like the 5% nation of gods and earths, right? An offshoot of the nation of Islam, and other what I would call utopian counter histories among Black folks, right? So I would say, yeah, it goes pretty far back. I agree that a lot of it is that desire, right? That kind of counterfactual desire, which I'm less interested in that. There was a very popular listserv on Afrofuturism many years ago. And where is it today? Well, today it's at the Met. You can go, I think the show is still up and you can go see it. And that's great. And that's, I don't know. I haven't seen the show yet. I look forward to it. I'm sure there are going to be some amazing things that are going to provoke some really cool insights. It hasn't been unnoticed by the layperson. Yeah, probably has been unnoticed by the layperson if you try to stretch it, make a continuity or a coherent line or a narrative of this history. Yeah. I don't think people would necessarily connect, even musical artists, right? People probably wouldn't connect Sun Ra to Prince, right? Or Prince to, Nona Hendrix. I don't know, they probably wouldn't make a lot of these connections. But I do. And I guess I'm not trying to be cagey. I just am really not interested in defining it. I think maybe the video that I made, Afrofuturist Vernacular English, was a way of bringing these ideas through the everyday, saying it's not a fantasy, we don't need Wakanda to be a physical place. And we have to think about what technology means. I truly believe in a very, I believe this to my core, that language is a core technology that people who do not have access to other technology deploy in a very sophisticated way. And that's why I'm very interested in lyricism, text, and music. So that's the Afrofuturism that I'm interested in. I just guess I just don't use the term Afrofuturism because it's so kind of coded in a utopian vision that I'm just kind of not really thinking about.
No, that sounds totally fair. I would also be skeptical of viewing an actual Afrofuturism exhibit at like the Met.
You should come check it out. Everyone should come check it out. I'm very curious about it. I'm
curious.
A couple of weeks, yeah.
I'm curious, but
I'm gonna get the catalog. Definitely going to get the catalog for sure.
it just seems whatever they put up is always going to be something that there's always something to be left out, but that's natural for a exhibit. They do the best they can, but
Sure.
Paige, do we have time for more questions, or I believe you're muted.
Yes. If there are one or two more questions, I saw another person about. I mean, you've been talking a lot about the video, the Afrofuturist vernacular English, and people are asking about that. But I don't know if there are other questions.
I see one more question here. It says, I have to admit that I'm at a loss for watching Afrofuturist vernacular English. I don't understand why the entire clip has to be presented in the way the robot speaks. At the same time, are there any deeper meanings of the repeated words that appear several times? Why are the people in this video superimposed in red and green? Is there any special meaning for some pictures to be presented more like an abstract comic style? And what was the inspiration for doing this? Those are a lot of questions. Can I work backwards? What was the inspiration for doing this? Again, think of it as a thought experiment that actually means a lot, and I took to heart. What are the poetic possibilities of mistranslation, as opposed to, say, the fatal possibilities of mistranslation? Okay, so that's that answer to that question. Is there any special meaning for some pictures to be presented more like an abstract comic style? Yes. Sometimes we think we exist in an empirical reality, and sometimes that reality becomes fissured, or we enter a psychological or imaginative portal, and we see things more abstractly. And then, as artists, we kind of come back with both and decide where we want to place the emphasis for a particular piece. I don't understand why the entire clip has to be presented in the way the robot speaks. I thought the robot was the most neutral way to bring these languages together. And, we are at the moment of emergent AI. And the robot is so ubiquitous. Siri, do you agree that the robot is ubiquitous? Siri agrees that the robot is ubiquitous. Why are the people in the video superimposed in red and green? They are superimposed in red and green, and they're outlined in black. There might be some meaning to that. I don't know. And I'm at a loss for watching it. Yeah, me too sometimes. So I hope that answers some of your questions.
I absolutely love you gesturing to deferring that question to Siri. That was genius, and I wish I had done that in some of my presentations in the past. Awesome.
Well,
to check, maybe we'll take, if there's one more, but I just wanted to check that you're referring to at the Met, because I haven't been in New York in a while, so as many people probably haven't, you're referring to the both, there's, because I was looking at the site, so there's both a new period room that's opened, that's referred to as the Afrofuturist period room. And then there's also an exhibition, right? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
Fictions of Emancipation exhibition. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. So
check all of it out. I can't wait.
Yeah, and there's a catalog for that. Yeah. It's an interesting. It's a great framework of you working with this, and I think again, like you constantly coming back to the fact that it's a documentary practice for you. This approach, right? This idea about the return of the present, the future, and the past as that record spins, and as technology shifts around and across different media, is a really distinct approach to questions around Afrofuturism. So it occurs to me it's like it's almost like a red herring for that piece, for the students to have gotten that piece, right, where you're really taking a different tack than a kind of general meanings attached to potentially, or other versions of attached to Afrofuturism, right? Yours is really cyclical.
Absolutely.
And Yeah, and actually even builds on some of the kind of work that Crystal Z. Campbell was showing last week here, even in terms of the colors and totally different framework. But it just occurred to me as someone was talking about this red and the green, that their work.
White and black.
Yeah.
Maybe those colors have meaning.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So are there any other questions before we wrap up? Alice had a question. You want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, I was gonna say, didn't Crystal last week say that they also used red and black in their work because not red and black, red and green in their work because it's it's an uncommon used color concept or something like that? Or it's I forget the reason why they said they used red and green. But
That sounds very familiar, and yet my first thought is that I thought red and green was the quintessential colors of Christmas. But yes.
No, I mean,
I remember Crystal said something about it last week.
Yeah, what she actually said was she talked about that they're actually the hardest colors to see, that they're in fact that people are in fact, the imperceptibility of seeing the differences between these two colors and working in the sense that these are actually things that people might not be able to perceive. And working.
That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah, and that they were talking about this idea that the working with red and green was actually working with imperceptibility. Right? That images, just like your piece of the removal of the body figure in the first or the second piece about celebration, the lynching celebrations, that by working with red and green, Crystal Campbell's work was playing with this producing imperceptibility.
It's also a callback to the Black nationalist colors that are, dating back to the 1960s. The last line Chuck D has in the song, the Public Enemy song, "Don't Believe It," the hype is red, black, and green. You know what I mean? So that's another callback, right?
Right, less phenomenological and much more explicit political statement, right?
Many levels in which it can be.
Yes. No, that's a great ending, I think. The red, black, and green. So thank you so much, Art. And
thank you.
And the questions next, I just want to say one other thing to the students, which is that for next week, Emily Martinez will be here, and she has sent out a survey to all of you to take before Sunday. I will post it in Discord, but a little bit earlier than your usual questions. You'll also have questions to do, but she's asked for a survey because she's going to be asking you about what you do and don't know about NFTs. And so she's going to be talking about that. Okay, so.
You also posted on UB Learns?
Yes, it is already posted there. It's already.
Where is it exactly?
It's under the Emily Martinez week.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, have a great week, and we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Bye.